Welcome back to The Explainer. Nelson Mandela. We all know the name, right? An icon, a global symbol of peace and reconciliation. But the story of how a man goes from revolutionary to prisoner to president is just incredible. Today, we're going to trace that journey.
All right, let's start right here with the moment that really cemented his legend. Picture this. It's 1964. Mandela is in court and he's literally facing the death penalty. And from the dock, he delivers these powerful, defiant words. It was a declaration that would echo for decades. So how did he even get to that point? And where did he go next? Well, that's what we're here to unpack.
So, to really get a handle on this incredible story, we're going to break it down into 6 key chapters. We'll look at his beginnings as a rebel, his time in prison, and of course, how he ended up leading an entire nation. First up, a rebel's cause. You know, it's easy to forget that Mandela wasn't born a revolutionary, not at all. He started out as Rolihlahla Mandela, a member of the Thembu royal family. His future was kind of mapped out for him as a tribal counselor. But the system he was born into, this brutal system of oppression, well, it changed everything.
And that system had a name: apartheid. After the National Party won the election in 1948, they basically wrote racial segregation into law. It was this institutionalized system that gave all the power and privilege to the white minority and systematically subjugated the black majority in, every single part of life. This really set the stage for decades of conflict.
Okay, this timeline really gives you a bird's eye view of his whole life. And you can see these really distinct phases, right? First, you've got the early years, the lawyer leading nonviolent campaigns. But then, look at that shift. Everything changes. He turns to armed struggle, gets that long prison sentence, which of course sets the stage for the final act, his release and his journey to becoming the architect of a new South Africa.
Now, this is something I find absolutely fascinating, because it really complicates that simple, clean image we have of Mandela the Great Unifier. He didn't start out that way. Early on, he had what was called an Africanist ideology. He was actually strongly against teaming up with non-black or communist groups. He believed black Africans had to lead their own fight. It was only through working side by side with anti-apartheid activists of all races that his perspective started to broaden. All right, let's get into what was a massive turning point. A moment when things on the ground forced a really dramatic, and let's be honest, controversial shift in strategy for Mandela and the African National Congress. So for years, the ANC was all about nonviolent resistance. But then came 1960 and the Sharpeville massacre. Police just opened fire on a crowd of peaceful protesters. 69 people were killed. It was a brutal wake-up call. For Mandela, and for a lot of others, it was the moment they realized peaceful protest just wasn't going to work against a state this violent. And yeah, this slide just lays it out perfectly. You can see the pivot right here. On one side, you have the path of nonviolence inspired by Gandhi. On the other, a totally different direction: armed struggle. He co-founds Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation, and completely goes underground. People even called him the Black Pimpernel. The peaceful lawyer was gone. In his place was a wanted militant.
But, and this is so important, this wasn't just a chaotic lashing out. The move to violence was very calculated. You can see the steps here. The initial strategy for MK was designed to hit the government where it hurt, economically, by targeting infrastructure, not people. Why? Because even then, even as they were taking up arms, the hope for future reconciliation was baked right into the plan. So in 1962, it all came to an end. Mandela's life on the run was over. He was arrested, put on trial in the famous Rivonia trial, and sentenced to life in prison. And this next chapter, this period of total isolation, well, paradoxically, it's what would turn him from a South African figure into a global symbol of the struggle. 27 years. Just think about that. For almost 3 decades, Nelson Mandela was just gone, locked away from his family, his movement, the entire world. And yet, somehow, his influence only grew stronger with every single year that passed. So for the first 18 of those years, he was on the infamous Robben Island. And the conditions there, they were just designed to break people. Hard labor in a lime quarry that actually permanently damaged his eyesight, stuck in a tiny, damp cell, and almost completely cut off from the outside world. But here's the truly amazing part. Instead of being broken, Mandela and his fellow prisoners turned Robben Island into what they called a university. Seriously, it became this hub of learning and political debate. He'd lead discussions, teach other prisoners, and, this is key,
He taught himself Afrikaans, the language of his captors, so that one day he could understand them and persuade them. Okay, so fast forward to the late 1980s. The apartheid government is feeling the heat, big time. There are international sanctions, massive protests at home. They're realizing the system just isn't sustainable, and they come to a pretty incredible conclusion. They have to negotiate with the one man who could actually lead the country out of this crisis, the very man they've locked away for decades. And those 4 years between his release in 1990 and that first democratic election in 94, man, it was a dangerous tightrope walk. Just think of the tension. These were incredibly complex negotiations, all aimed at one thing: dismantling the entire system of apartheid without letting the country explode into a civil war.
So now he's President Mandela. Let's look at the monumental task he had ahead of him. I mean, seriously, how do you even begin to heal a country that has been defined by division and violence for centuries?
Well, the ANC won the election in a landslide, getting nearly 63% of the vote. So Mandela had a clear mandate to govern. But here's what's so amazing. He didn't just take all the power for his party. In this incredible gesture of reconciliation, he formed a government of national unity. He actually invited his former jailers, the National Party, to help govern the country alongside him. His number one goal wasn't getting even. It was bringing the nation together. And there's no better example of this than the 1995 Rugby World Cup. When Mandela walked out onto that field wearing the Springboks jersey, a symbol that Black South Africans had hated for years, it was this unbelievably powerful moment. It was the birth of the Rainbow Nation right there on a rugby pitch.
But look, it wasn't all just powerful symbols. His government's Reconstruction and Development Program, the RDP, got to work making real, tangible changes. This was all about dismantling the economic legacy of apartheid, getting basic services like clean water, electricity, and housing to millions of people who had been denied them for their entire lives.
Okay, so after all of this, from rebel to presidents, how should we think about Nelson Mandela? What's his legacy? Well, as you can probably guess, it's not a simple answer. His legacy is absolutely massive, but it's also really complex, and people see it from a lot of different angles.
On one hand, he's this global icon of peace and forgiveness, the father of the nation. But on the other hand, he was a really controversial figure. I mean, let's not forget, leaders like Margaret Thatcher once called him a terrorist. And later in his life, some on the far left felt he was too quick to reconcile, that he compromised too much and didn't do enough to fix the deep economic inequality.
So in the end, Mandela's life, this whole journey, from an Africanist rebel to an armed militant to a forgiving statesman, it leaves us with a really powerful question, one that's still so relevant today. And this is why this story matters. His life, with all of its twists and turns, its contradictions, its compromises, it gives us a kind of roadmap, a difficult one for sure, but a roadmap for how you might navigate a path from deep, deep division to at least the hope of unity.